With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, I'm Dave Diegelman. I have a new podcast called Inner Cosmos on iHeart. I'm going to explore the relationship between our brains and our experiences by tackling unusual questions like, can we create new senses for humans? So join me weekly to uncover how your brain steers your behavior, your perception, and your reality. Listen to Inner Cosmos with David Eagleman on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
In August 2023, hip-hop officially turns 50 years old. A genre that broke out of the streets of the Bronx has become the most popular genre in music and now dominates global culture. iHeart Podcast Networks presents 50 Years of Hip-Hop Podcast, a series that follows the evolution of rap and hip-hop. With Fab Five Freddy and some of hip-hop's most iconic names, from hip-hop's innovators and legends to this generation's biggest executives and more, sharing stories and memories. Exclusively from iHeart Podcast Network, hashtag iHeart Hip Hop 50. Listen to 50 Years of Hip Hop Podcast on the iHeart Podcast Network, iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi there, I'm Zach Braff.
And I'm Donald Faison.
We're real-life best friends, but we met playing fake-life best friends, Turk and JD, on the sitcom Scrubs.
20 years later, we've decided to rewatch the series one episode at a time and put our memories into a podcast you can listen to at home.
We're going to get all our special guest friends like Sarah Chalk, John C. McGinley, Neil Flynn, Judy Reyes.
Show creator Bill Lawrence, editors, writers, and even prop masters will tell us about what inspired the series and how we became a family.
You can listen to the podcast Fake Doctors, Real Friends with Zach and Donald on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Jabberjaw Podcast Network.
You've probably always wanted to learn an instrument, right? Let Musician be your guide. It is an amazing app that is your personal music tutor. It's the best way to learn, practice, and master an instrument, and it listens to you play and gives you feedback in real time on your accuracy and your timing. Become the musician you've always wanted to be. Visit musician.com/words to try Musician with a 20% discount using the code WORDS. This thing is amazing. Try it out. You'll love it. Hi, everybody. How are you? I'm Ray Harkins. You're hanging out on 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I don't know why I like to be so, syllabic, just really punchy on the intros to make sure you're paying attention. Anyways, we're here talking about independent music like we always do week after week after week after. This is episode 353. We're approaching I think it's 7-year anniversary. I was trying to calculate it, and I think it's, episode 364 will be 7 years. And that's insane. That's just it's almost as old as my child, which is crazy to think about. But the guest this week is Ryan Clark. He plays in a band called Demon Hunter. He also previously played in Focal Point, Training for Utopia, and so many other, those are basically extremely meaningful bands to me, and that was the main thrust of why I wanted Ryan on the show. I mean, Demon Hunter, as I will reveal in the interview, I'm not the hugest fan of, but his work, not only as a musician and an artist, in all the stuff that he does with his output in general, I just really, really respect him and wanted to have him on the show, and we did it, and it's great. But before I tell you about anything else, you need to go to rockabilia.com, type in the code PCJabberjaw, and that gets you 10% off of your order. And they have so many items that you could possibly want, and you can just order $1,000 worth of merch, and you're going to get $100 off. That's like me buying you 10 shirts? It's great. But I, in all honesty, if you're not ordering from Rockabilia, you are messing up. They're the best in this game, as far as I'm concerned. Fast shipping. They know exactly what to do with your order if there is any issue whatsoever. They're great customer service. I love what they do. So thank you for your continued support, Rockabilia. Please visit rockabilia.com like I urge you all the time to do, okay? And what else do I got? I am announcing a show that Taken is playing. We are playing June 22nd. Tickets are almost sold out. Chain Reaction with our good buddies in Curl Up and Die. If you have, missed those announcements or what have you, I get it. Everyone's busy. But buy your tickets. Allages.com. You can go to the Chain Reaction website. Last I was told, there was less than 50 tickets left. So it'll probably sell out. And it's going to be a really, really fun show. It's with our friends, like I said, Curl Up and Die, but also Seizures and Regional Justice Center. It is a great hardcore show. Diverse. Bill. I love when that happens. So yeah, that's what's happening next month. And you also please tell other people about this podcast. Like, I know it sounds like I'm begging, this show needs more listeners. That's not what I'm aiming for. What I'm aiming for is the people that don't know about this show. Like, there are probably friends of yours that kind of dabble in podcasts, or like, oh yeah, I like punk, hardcore, or whatever. Like, put this podcast on their player. Like, literally grab their phone out of their hand, type it in whatever podcast player they have, and be like, here, listen to just go through the archive, pick out some episodes, download them for them, download your favorite episode for them. And then, and then hopefully they'll be keyed into this, because that's the only way that this show not only grows bigger, but I just want the people that should know about this to know about this. Does that make sense? Okay. And what else do I have to tell you? I have to tell you that, Ryan Clark was just such a good guest. Okay. Both Focal Point and Training for Utopia. I got to see Focal Point once, I think, and Training for Utopia I got to see a couple of times. But both of those records, Suffering of the Masses from Focal Point, and I would say probably the self-titled EP from Training for Utopia. I did like Plastic Soul Impalement, which was their Training for Utopia's record that came out after the EP. But that EP, man, that thing just slays. And Focal Point just really spoke to my Christian hardcore kid, vegetarian, straight edge sensibilities. Like, I loved that record. I remember, I think it was my sophomore year of high school. I listened to that record so much. It was actually between my freshman year and my sophomore year. I remember traveling. I was like on a 2-week trip over in Ireland. And I remember, I think I listened to that record like 2 or 3 times a day. Like, I could not stop playing it. It was like, once it was over, it's like, boom. All right, there we go. Let's listen to it again. So, I was really, really excited that Ryan was able to come onto the show, because, I bug him about a lot of stuff he hasn't been bugged about in a while. And Demon Hunter it's a band that I am not personally a huge fan of, but they are incredible at what they do. And they just released their 9th and 10th full length. Like, come on, give me a break. Such a legit band. So anyways, that's kind of the reason why he came on, but it was mostly for me to bug him about his old bands. But anyways, that's what we got. And here is the interview. Okay. I'll talk to you in a bit. At the very offset, Focal Point was a huge, huge band for me, and I definitely saw you guys play at the Barn in Riverside. I think it was with Overcome, if I'm not mistaken. I'm from Southern California, so
wow, yeah, that would have been a while ago.
Yes, quite some time ago. And the thing that, once I was able to kind of, because I had just started going to shows at that time, but the thing that reflected me as a unique experience where. Here is, Focal Point that clearly has, at that time, you had released a record on Tooth and Nail, but also had released a 7-inch on Life Sentence Records, which obviously was the complete sort of antithesis of what Tooth and Nail and Solid State was. Yeah. And like bands, really didn't kind of cross over. Honestly, it's like you guys and Overcome really were the bands that kind of towed around in both worlds. I'm guessing that was just a function of who was interested in kind of releasing your music, or was this an intentional like, hey, yeah, of course we'll release a 7-inch on Life Sentence, and then well, of course we'll work with Tooth and Nail, or was there something that was like, yeah, we want to make this statement?
Right, man. I'm going to have to go down memory lane, and
I apologize.
That's all right. So I remember we had become fans of a lot of the Tooth and Nail bands at the time. And we got the opportunity to play a show with Overcome, which, honestly might have been the one that you saw. Was that, do you think, prior to us having a record out?
I want to say it was after. I'm fairly certain you did play with Overcome at the Barn, and it had to have been with a larger band as well. I just can't recall who it was, but okay. But yeah, it definitely was. You did play with them.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking about a show that I believe we got the opportunity to play with Overcome in, I want to say it was Bakersfield. And after we played that show, we had, I think we somehow got the contact for the owner of Life Sentence, Dan Gump. And he had showed some interest in us, and he actually drove out from Salt Lake City to Sacramento and watched us play in our practice space. And he showed some interest in putting something out. I'm not exactly sure where that came from, other than he had worked with Overcome, and we had kind of had some correspondence with those guys. And I think that he was, pretty open-minded as far as that stuff went. He was obviously more interested in releasing the straight edge stuff, but at that time we were kind of decidedly straight edge / Christian band. So we were willing to kind of wear both of those things on our sleeve. So I think that was part of what interested him in us. And after we played that show with Overcome, we kind of both at that time had our 7 inches out, and Jason Stinson after that show phoned Brandon Ebel at Tooth and Nail and said, we just played with this band, you got to check them out. And Brandon called my parents' house at the time where my brother and I lived and left a message saying, hey, this is Brandon at Tooth and Nail. Jason Stinson told me that I have to reach out to you guys because he really loved you guys, and Jason's really picky, so I know that you guys must be good if he likes you. So that's kind of how the story goes, and everything after that was rapid fire. You were just reacting, yeah. Yeah, and within the next month, he had booked us on this kind of showcase, Tooth and Nail showcase festival thing that he was putting on, and so we went down to Southern California. That was in Irvine, right? I believe yes, it was. Yeah, dude, I remember going to that because it was really weird. That was like a huge outdoor festival thing, and I remember all of the like quote unquote heavier, scarier bands played like you guys in Living Sacrifice, and I totally forgot about that. I remember. Yeah, that was so weird. Very weird. And so we were kind of just thrust into it. But that was, about as exciting as it ever gets, right? We were huge Tooth and Nail fans, and growing up, it's like for the last couple of years prior to that, it's like all my brother and I ever wanted for Christmas was just like, you just go through the Tooth and Nail catalog and circle like everything, So we were huge fans at that point. And so to be kind of courted by the label at that time was obviously, there are very few things in life that surpass that initial, like the first time that you get signed or you get some interest in that regard, or the first time you hear yourself on the radio or things like that. It's like the things that become kind of commonplace after a while, and you kind of lose it loses its luster after a while. But those were the days where everything was just exciting. Sure, absolutely. Well, I think you also you spoke of experience that was so interesting for multiple reasons. Where like the message on your answering machine, where it's like you had first of all your parents being like, "Hey, this record label's calling," and then they didn't know what that was, but then you were excited about it, and they were like, "Oh, this adult is calling," and it's just like that's a weird juxtaposition of like your parents being let a little bit into the world that you are experimenting with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And what's funny is when we were teenagers, I played in Focal Point since I was 15 years old. We ended up getting signed when I was 16. And my parents had to sign the contract for me, obviously, because if you're a minor, you can't sign it yourself. So when we were teenagers, and my brother was playing music shortly after I was, obviously, with Training for Utopia, we never wanted our parents at our shows. You know what I mean? It was still like It was still that distance that we needed at that point from our parents and that whole thing. So it wasn't until years later, Demon Hunter, that we even welcomed our parents to shows, just, being bullheaded kids or whatever. So they never saw us with Training for Utopia. They kind of knew that we, what we were doing, and that we had seen a little bit of success, at least to the degree where we were playing shows and traveling, outside of the city to Reno or Los Angeles or wherever to play. And so they knew about that, but I don't think they really realized, when we got that answering machine message and all that kind of stuff, I think it started to really kind of come to light that we were really doing things.
Yeah, no, totally. I my own personal anecdote with that was like I definitely had a message on my answering machine from Mike Hartsfield from New Age Records trying to book a show with a band I played in. And it was just one of those things where it's like, I see a note on my door being like, Mike Hartsfield called. And I was like, what? Like, Mom, you don't know how important this is to me.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I love that stuff, and unfortunately, like I said, as the years go by and things like that become kind of commonplace, you don't have that same joy that you did when all those things, like the first time that all those things happen, which, it's good to look back on them though.
Sure. I think, because to your point, I think there is still that notion where the excitement still exists. I think you were just able to, I guess, temper it or control it in a way that is like, you're not just like a fumbling 15-year-old fool. You're like, okay, like, this person means a lot to me. Their music means a lot to me. Like, I need to be a normal human being to this person, because then they'll, not think I'm some crazy psychopath or whatever. Of
course, yeah. You kind of learn to navigate those waters a little bit more professionally, I guess.
Right. Yeah, totally. The excitement still exists. It's just like, undercover in ways that, you wouldn't be able to put to words when you were, 14 years old and you have no idea.
For sure.
So reflecting on you as a person, I mean, I'm going to gloss over a few things because I know you've spoken about them many, many times. Like, I know you were born and raised in Northern California with your brother. Do you have any other siblings?
Oh, I don't. Don's the only one. He's 4 years older than I am. And I was actually born in Southern California.
Oh, that's right. And then you made your way up. That's right.
Yep. I was born in Whittier. And then for the pretty much moved out of Whittier like the first year I was alive. And then the first 10 years of my life were in Bend, Oregon, before Bend was like a vacation destination that it is now. It was a real small town back then, basically like 1980 to 90. And then we moved to just outside of Sacramento in 1990.
That was like Walnut Creek, right?
It was Elk Grove, so it's about 25 minutes south of Sac.
Got it. And so I'm gonna guess that the the brotherly relationship that you had, because clearly you guys both went on the path of being very interested in music and your influences bouncing off of one another. Did you ever kind of have the sort of adverse brother relationship where it's like, okay, like he's into this, I got to be into this because this is his thing, or did you guys always kind of navigate those waters together?
Music is really what brought us together after, I would say like as high school for me was kind of coming to a close, and he had been graduated for a while. I had kind of found punk rock through skateboarding, through friends and neighbors and things like that, prior to my brother really going down that road. And so I started playing in bands before he even, picked up a guitar. And then our friends and our age gap and all those things kind of slowly started to dissipate, and they all kind of started to be the same. Like I was playing in Focal Point, I was playing with a guy who he went to high school with, Danny. And so, there was a lot more crossover at that point, and the age gap started to go away. But I would say in our younger years, there was a little bit of that just by virtue of your standard rebellion and siblinghood and all that kind of stuff. He was very much into, cars and stuff in high school, like VWs and mini trucks, because that was what was cool back then. And, airbrushing, like all these very
dated
90s dated things, and I was super into skateboarding. He was into snowboarding, but like at that point, mid high school, they didn't really cross over for us, and we were into things that were remotely the same, and that were all kind of rooted in the same sort of counterculture, subculture thing. But it wasn't until I kind of found punk and hardcore and started playing in bands. And a couple of years after that, he was really involved, at least with like being a fan and being kind of involved in the scene. And it wasn't long after I did that where he had kind of learned how to play guitar enough to play in Training for Utopia, and they started that. prior to me being in the band. He started that with a couple of friends, two of which were actually younger than me. So again, like, you have this group of friends that is just hardcore kids from the neighborhood, and the age gap at that point wasn't such a big deal. So moving into like 18, 19, 20, that's when everything started to just kind of meld, and we were kind of in it together.
Sure. No, that's cool, because I do think there is that fun relationship when you are able to navigate that, not only with your friends and your peer group, but then your own flesh and blood can kind of have that that those influences bouncing back and forth with one another, because I'm sure you and many of your friends have the exact opposite experience, where they just look at the the stuff that you're getting into. It's like, what is this weird yelling stuff? Like, I'm not into it at all.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had different kind of subgroups of friends throughout high school that were, based on whatever interests I had. There was my hardcore friends, skateboard friends, and then kind of almost on the other side of the fence, where I was heavily into graffiti all throughout high school. And so I had kind of graffiti friends who were all these like hip hop guys and guys that, scratched records and spray painted and stuff. And so I was kind of bouncing between groups, as it were. And so, yeah, I was definitely, they all kind of came around to it, and they were definitely supportive, even though that wasn't their thing. And actually a lot of the hardcore friends that I had actually ended up making really good friends with those graffiti friends that I had. And so it wasn't long before it was all a little bit synonymous.
Sure, totally. Well, especially when you're talking about all of these subcultures, and once people recognize the fact that, oh yeah, like, even though this person's into a different strain of the thing, it's still all just like weirdo outsider art.
Of course. Yep.
And I know much has been spoken about, where it's like, oh, your father's a pastor, and like, clearly that was the path where you guys were going to go on as far as, your religious upbringing and everything. Kind of pinpointing you more as a person, when did you kind of feel like you were able to, I guess, speak to like your own personal faith? Because, every kid that gets raised within the context of a faith or a church, runs into that point where it's like, is this actually what I believe, or am I going to search this somewhere else? So like, did you have, I'm sure you had that thought and that kind of approach in your own personal relationship with your faith?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it wasn't like a major aha moment, like I grew up in the church, and, I think the general rule of thumb is probably that I shouldn't have ended up remaining a believer, to be honest, based on, people that I've heard grew up in the church or grew up with pastors or preachers as dads, and family members of mine that kind of grew up in similar situation. I think that the odds are that I probably shouldn't have stayed this way. But I think my parents kind of struck a pretty good balance of instilling that stuff in us, but also not beating us over the head with it, and also being just genuinely cool people. And so what they kind of showed us resonated with me, especially as I got kind of into adulthood. I started seeing a lot of friends kind of bow out of it and things like that, by virtue of them being bummed out at the church, or at some version of judgment that they felt from the greater, quote unquote Christian world, especially guys in bands. It's a very scrutinizing scene, and you kind of have to have a lot of patience, because there is that legalistic side of it that is ever present and is difficult to put up with year after year. Yeah. And so, I have just, it's more of a natural thing for me to see that as failed people and not a failed faith. And I don't see that as failure in my God. I see that as failure in people. And so I've always been able to kind of separate those two things. And the older I get, the more and more that my worldview whether it relates to hope or just, what I feel like creation is and should be, and all of those sorts of things. It just rings more and more true to me, and more sensible. The things, the big things in life that are very gray, feel like they have answers, at least things that I can cling to as a hope. And so I like that aspect of it.
Sure, absolutely. Sure. No, I appreciate you walking me through that, because I definitely think that there, like you said, there is this real, a dividing line where it's like, so especially within the context of you playing out in a band and then, having your feet firmly planted within. It's like, even if you play a show with a Christian band and you are not a Christian, like, I'll never forget. I remember, I know you remember this band, but I played a show with that band, Born Blind, at Chain Reaction. And like, I never had been questioned really in the past for like any of my, like lyrics or anything. I didn't like swear at myself in my band or anything, but like, I had a person like asking me like, hey, could I look at your lyrics like at the show? And it was one of those things where it's like, and I know that's happened to you probably plenty of times. And it's like, oh yeah. Or like, you can't spit on stage. Like, I remember hearing, stories about, MXPX getting criticized for spitting on stage. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is insane, So but I appreciate you walking me through that.
Sure. I mean, it's like, it's like two-pronged for me. I subscribe to.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Trust me in saying that therapy is an incredible tool for as you are traveling through life, because who you are as a person, 5 or 10 years ago is maybe a completely different version of yourself, because we run into challenges, whether it's work, whether it's life stuff, relationships, all of those things you can work through with a therapist. And that is why I love BetterHelp and what they do. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and then you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Ray to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/Ray. Dip in, give therapy a try, and become a better person.
Leftovers. Or the DMV.
Number 97.
Or house cleaning. Or
Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, I'm David Eagleman. I have a new podcast called Inner Cosmos on iHeart. I'm a neuroscientist and an author at Stanford University, and I've spent my career exploring the 3-pound universe in our heads. On my new podcast, I'm going to explore the relationship between our brains and our experiences by tackling unusual questions so we can better understand our lives and our realities. Like, does time really run in slow motion when you're in a car accident? Or can we create new senses for humans? Or what does dreaming have to do with the rotation of the planet? So join me weekly to uncover how your brain steers your behavior, your perception, and your reality. Listen to Inner Cosmos with David Eagleman on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Like the big picture stuff as it pertains to my spirituality and eternal life and a Christ and things like that. Where I kind of bow out or fight against is the more legalistic side of those things, the side that asks us not to be people that are flawed and normal. And so that is something that Demon Hunter has always kind of been for me, is something that on one hand may serve to kind of pump up like-minded people, but on the other hand may also serve to kind of poke at that bubble where those more legalistic people reside.
Listen up. You probably have heard SiriusXM before, right? Like just maybe. But did you know they offer the deepest variety of commercial-free music for every genre and every mood? And not only that, but they have a ton of awesome news shows, biggest names in talk, entertainment, and comedy. So you think you're like, you know what? Yeah, I've heard of that. It's that thing they give you occasionally inside your car. But did you know that you can listen to it outside the car? Right now, you can get your first 3 months of SiriusXM outside the car for just $1. Just go to SiriusXM.com/words to see the offer details and to subscribe. And for $1, you can listen to SiriusXM on your phone, at home, and online. So anywhere you are, any time of the day, you can hear your favorite songs or discover new ones. So please go to SiriusXM, SiriusXM.com/words and get your first 3 months of SiriusXM outside the car for $1. See the offer details, and the offer is only available to new SiriusXM streaming subscribers. SiriusXM, no car required. I love this service. I've been playing around with it, and I can't recommend it enough. Okay, SiriusXM, dive in.
Clearly, throughout your process of kind of developing who you are and the subcultures that you're interested in, from graffiti and punk and hardcore and everything, it sounds like the lane that you kind of always lived in was like, yo, I like art. Like, like you weren't going to be, you weren't, I'm sure in some respects you were raised to be kind of a pastor's kid, but like that wasn't the path for you, or like, being a sports dude wasn't a path for you. Was that always kind of like, this is the world I feel comfortable with?
Yeah, early it was like baseball was a big thing for my brother and I, baseball card collecting and all that kind of stuff. And like that for me was a very short-lived thing. I got hit in the eye with a baseball and had to go to the emergency room, and I was like, all right, I'm done. And that was
that was the end of my career.
Yeah, my career's done. So I was like 10 years old at that point, and I very quickly found skateboarding. We had a skateboard growing up that was kind of a hand-me-down from a cousin, and I was attracted to that world, to Thrasher magazine, like all the stuff that kind of went with it. And to me, that was really the catalyst for everything that followed. I can trace that back to the art on skateboard decks by Jim Phillips and VC Johnson. Like that is the art that resonated with me the most and still does today. And then by way of Thrasher magazine, you see like these independent record label ads, and you see Pusshead artwork, and then you buy skate videos and you hear all these punk bands and hardcore bands that you've never heard, and even some classic rock stuff. And that world completely opened my eyes to like a counterculture that me as a suburbanite white kid, with not a lot around me in terms of like a big city or culture, it gave me something to kind of like feel like was my own, was like in my pocket, and so that was really major for me. And I point basically everything back to skateboarding and the culture that surrounds skateboarding as kind of like the beginning of my infatuation with like any sort of sub or counterculture lifestyle.
Sure, that was your diving board into the weird pool that we all swim in. Well, not we all do, but the thing that I find interesting about you and your brother, just like as a casual observer and having many mutual friends together existing in the scene that we do, you guys have always straight up struck me as like very obsessive people about the things that you're into, and in ways that I myself as an only child identify with. But it's interesting because usually that exists kind of not exclusively with only children, but I don't know. I see it's like both of you guys getting so into stuff, and then being able to immerse yourself in these worlds is really I just find it interesting. I don't know if you've reflected on that at all, but something I've observed.
Sure. I mean, part of growing up as a pastor's kid and growing up as a kid who in that regard isn't really like, that's not a cool scene. You know what I mean? Like there had to be a way to make it cool if I was going to feel comfortable subscribing to it, to be honest, like especially as a teenage kid. So when I heard the music of, bands, that would finally start to resonate with me on a level, Christian bands, especially early on, were kind of a joke in terms of where they kind of fit into the greater puzzle of music. It was, the well was very shallow, and most of it was super derivative, and not very interesting and kind of Bible-y. And so when these bands started popping up that actually sounded good and were closer to the kind of stuff that I was into outside of the Christian world, I mean, that was super major for me. And I think that just the synonymous nature of being an outsider, like you said, counterculture, whether that's through Christianity or whether that's punk rock or straight edge, I was comfortable kind of living in that world, and I wanted basically to kind of create my own little world within my suburb, you know what I mean? Like, and that for me was decidedly against the grain. And so those sorts of things to me kind of run synonymous. Like there's a punk rock nature, if you ask me, to people of faith, especially in this day and age. It's still not cool, and I know that. And I feel like it's kind of my job to do whatever I can to make kids who are growing up right now feel like it is cool, because there were a handful of bands when I grew up that did that for me. And it was hugely instrumental in my life.
No, totally. Yeah. And I think it speaks to that obsessive nature where it's like once you, not everybody goes as deep down the rabbit hole as people like, you and I have, but like it speaks to that thing that you get into it. It's like, no, I gotta there is no shortage of things that I can pay attention to. So like just turn on the faucet and let me just drink until like my stomach is absolutely distended and full, Yeah,
totally. And I realize I kind of half answered your question, but
no, it's fine.
I mean, getting obsessed with something like that is partly, I think, to do with, again, just like loving that counterculture thing and that subculture thing and just what it is to like pre-internet discover something. That was obviously awesome. And when you start doing that, via zines or catalogs or Thrasher magazine or whatever it is, again, like you said, it just kind of opens up and you realize how much stuff is out there and how many people across the nation and the world are like you and doing things like you and doing the kind of stuff that you want to hear and see. And I think also compounded by the fact that I grew up really poor, when I became an adult and was making money for myself and things like that, I go back and collect all this stuff that I couldn't afford as a kid. All the skateboards I wanted, all the shoes that I wanted, like all the things that like, don't at the end of the day don't really amount to much, but the things that were like I see as very instrumental in kind of shaping who I was as an artist. I have now the luxury of kind of going back and being like, I'm an adult. I can buy that if I want, And so that's a very slippery slope, obviously, if you love a lot of things. For me, it's like it spans far into, clothing, artwork, music. So there's a lot of categories that I'm really obsessed with. And obviously there's a lot of stuff within each of those categories to keep me really busy.
Yeah. You definitely have to pick your spots once you get to a certain age. It's like, oh dude, I can't do all of this. Like,
man, I know. Like Depeche Mode just started releasing all those singles of every record they've ever done on vinyl. And it's like, oh, that's my favorite band, but that is such a slippery slope because they have like 100 singles.
Totally.
So I'm not about to spend like $10K on, Depeche Mode singles. So, but that's the kind of thing that it's in my nature to do.
Totally. And you have that conversation in your head where it's just like, oh man, whereas like most normal people would be like, yeah, I would never do that. And you're like, well, no, you have to consider that though.
Of course. Yeah.
Considering you were bringing home such, weird influences and all of these things that, your parents probably had little to no understanding about. But like you said, they gave you the space in which to explore these things. Do you remember a time where they were like concerned, where they were like, all right, Ryan, we let you do your thing, but like, what is this playing in bands? It's yelling and stuff. Like, when do you feel, or if there was any point where you felt like they were not concerned, like overly concerned, but, were expressing more than like, I don't know, Ryan, this seems weird.
Well, yeah, I mean, there were definitely growing pains with the style of music that we were into, the cultures at large. I remember my brother luckily he was the first person to go get a tattoo, so he was kind of the guinea pig in that regard. And
how they reacted to that one.
Oh my gosh. So my mom lost it. She called the Better Business Bureau, all this, even though he was 18, like she was very, concerned about whether or not it was a clean place and all this stuff. And, like little by little, I started getting them, and she would kind of roll her eyes and sigh and, and then, fast forward to today, they're like, I could show up with like a tattoo on my face and she might not even notice, they've come a long way for sure. And in regards to music, there were definitely things that like we quote unquote could not have. I would change into Metallica shirts and Megadeth shirts when I got to school, because I couldn't wear that kind of stuff. And I would keep Slayer CDs and Rage Against the Machine CDs nicely tucked away where they couldn't find them. And I knew that there was definitely a line. In terms of the style of music itself, I don't remember there being a huge issue with that. I know they didn't really understand it or get it at the beginning, but I think that to them, if we were good kids, and if we weren't rebelling in the very obvious rebellion ways, or at least not to the degree where we were getting in lots of trouble, I think they were less concerned with the style of music that we were playing or the kind of stuff that we were interested in. I think to give them credit, I think that they were able to see that we were doing something, we were creating something, we were making something, we were staying busy with it, and we were devoted to it, and it wasn't getting us in a lot of trouble. And they also knew kind of about our, straight edge and things like that, which I can't help but imagine that they were at least a little bit psyched on that when we were in high school. I would X up when I would go to school, so I was very much into it. And at that age, I think that definitely kind of draws a line in the sand between you and like the partying jocks or whatnot. And so I think they probably were kind of stoked at that. I think they probably would have rather it just been by virtue of being a Christian, but I don't think they were going to complain too much about it. So to them, it was always more about who we were as individuals. And that's, over the years, that's kind of become much more apparent with everything we do, is that how we look and what we're into and that all that kind of stuff means nothing to them anymore, beyond who we are as individuals.
Totally. Two minor threads I want to pick out in there. So you X'd up going to school, which is definitely an experience that I did as well. But the important question, did you X up both hands or just one hand?
Both.
Okay. See,
Earth practice style.
So this was my kid logic on this. I, Xing up both hands was like what you do at shows, clearly, and like you mentioned, Earth Crisis.
Right.
So a casual straight edge, so just like your daily walking around straight edge was one hand. So
that's sensible. I get it.
The fact that I like wrapped my head around that, and I was like, oh yes, I'm just going to wear 1X at my small private Lutheran high school. It's like, what the hell was I thinking? But yeah, still.
Yeah, ditto. Yeah.
Totally. I always encountered that notion of what you were talking about, where you had your, your parents like didn't completely understand, but then once you kind of walk them through, just the basic ideas of like, oh, this is what straight edge and this, playing in bands and stuff like that. And like, I'm sure you encountered many peers and friends that had, continual troubles with their parents because they were, like not living up to their end of the bargain or whatever. And in my head, I was always like, why don't you make this like a little bit easier on yourself and like, just, like do some of the stuff that they say. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, most of my friends had a lot longer leash than I did. For the most part, my childhood neighborhood friends were not Christian. Their parents weren't. And that's not to say that's the only version or, method by which rules or regulations or things come by. But all that to say, they all had quite quite a bit more freedom than I did in terms of just kind of those standard, like how late you're going to stay out, like whose houses you're going to go to, what kind of stuff you're going to wear, what kind of stuff you're going to listen to, watch on TV. So most of my friends really didn't have that same sort of like ramifications that I did with that stuff. It was more like they all knew kind of that I was the one that would need to be home earlier, or, I was the one that, wasn't going to really mess around with stuff by virtue of being worried I'd get caught for certain things or whatever. So,
sure.
For the most part, like I didn't have a ton of friends that really had the same sort of story that I did.
Sure. Well, yeah. Once you or your brother came around, everyone's like, "Oh, dude, you guys, we gotta chill out. These are like the pastor's kids." Like, just kidding.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would go like graffiti with friends, and we would go to like a train yard, and my friends were awesome, but they all knew that if I got in trouble, it would be a big deal, and so if there was ever any kind of heat, like if we ever got chased out of the train yard by cops or anything like that, they would let me run, and they would kind of like hold off anyone that would come and mess with us or whatever. So
that's perfect.
Yeah. It was very, very understood that if Brian gets caught, like there's no coming back from this.
Right. There's hailfire storm would come your direction. Yeah.
Exactly.
That makes total sense. So, as you started to, get out and, play shows, with Focal, was Focal Point like literally the first band you played in, or you probably had to play in some terrible band before that, right?
Yeah, I was in a band called Opposed.
Okay. I'm sorry, I don't mean to categorize your prior band as being terrible, but I'm just assuming it's your high school band. It probably
we were
is.
Amazing.
Okay.
The first like band that ever played any shows would have been Opposed. I had a bunch of like bands that were basically just me and friends drawing logos on paper, but the first band that actually like recorded on a ghetto blaster and sold tapes at my school, actually that would have been a band called Forklift, which was like a
wow. That is an amazing name, dude.
It was one of those bands that it was at the age where you didn't really know how to converge all of the kinds of styles of music that you were into, so you kind of decided to just kind of play all of them.
Of course.
And so, that would have been like 9th grade. And it was everything from like, pop punk to Helmet sounding stuff and everything in between. And so we recorded like a cassette tape, again, on a ghetto blaster outside the practice room. And
sure.
We sold probably 20 or 30 of them at high school. And then, once things started getting a little more serious, I met my brother's friend, Danny. He was a really good guitar player, had a lot of pro gear and stuff like that. That's when we kind of started Opposed. And that, I believe we had one show that we actually played. And then Opposed kind of just morphed into Focal Point. So that was almost like the earliest inception of Focal Point was this thing Opposed.
Got it.
But when we decided to get even more serious, we changed the name and things like that. So, sure. That was the very, very beginning.
Got it. And so once you started to play out and play shows and, even do the limited amount of touring that you did, and you did more with training for Utopia, what was your relationship with touring? Did you enjoy it? Was it something that you had to grow to like?
Back then it was very different. I remember, everything about it was different, like when it's just fly by night and you're calling promoters from a landline, 3-4 months ahead, booking shows. And then as far as they're booked and you're just going to show up, I remember seeing that change in like what it means to be like a total DIY 90s musician to what the real world looks like in terms of, when you're booking shows now, there's like a lot of communication between when you book it and when you get there. And there's the load-in time and all this, there's all this stuff that comes with it now that obviously makes it more professional and makes more sense. But back then it just seemed so, I mean, DIY is the only way to put it, like everyone was just kind of winging it. And it was fun in that regard. It was definitely not the sort of thing where we could expect to play in front of very many people. So I don't necessarily remember being bummed out by that fact, but, Focal Point toured one summer, our only tour, and we had a couple of great crowds, but then there were probably 5 or 7 shows where we played in front of 3-4 people.
Sure.
And, it was probably a bummer to me back then. I don't remember exactly, but it was always pretty sweet though, because I was 17 and I was on the road and we were doing it, so there was still like a silver lining to all of it. But over the years, as it became more of like it starts to resemble a job, you know what I mean? Not that it ever really fully does feel that way, but it just
it becomes a routine.
It's a routine, yeah, and the amount of commitment and the things that are expected, kind of all those things start to increase, and especially being in a band like Demon Hunter, there's all these things to worry about or think about. I've always had a bit of a love-hate thing with touring. I wouldn't necessarily say that's why we've done it so infrequently. I think that's more just because of the sorts of jobs that we've had outside of the band, and the fact that we've kind of had our cake and have been eating it too since we started the band.
Sure.
We have the design careers that are very much, for my brother, it was that was his first love. And for me, it was a very close second love. And so it was hard to really complain about what we did at home and the sort of lives that we led at home. And so touring was a nice break and a nice vacation and a good excuse to hang out with friends and hang out with the band and be able to play shows live and legitimize the band and the records and things like that. But it was never there was never an obligation that we felt to be doing it. And so being that our home life was always we were always very busy and we were grinding and we were really building a business, being on the road always felt mostly like a waste of our time. And I don't mean that from when we were playing, that was great. And that was amazing. But when we weren't playing, there really wasn't much of a way for us to be, designing or be doing any of that work that we were doing at home. And so it was kind of frustrating, having to kind of switch one off and switch one on. And then the one that when you're touring, when that switches on, your ability to do anything else, even if you kind of try to in the van or the bus or whatever, it just quickly becomes apparent that you're not really able to. And so it seems like a lot of downtime that you can't really do much with when you're on tour. And that was and is really hard for me when we're out for long periods of time.
Sure. No, I appreciate you walking me through that, because frankly, I knew I was going to elicit that sort of response, because it does, you have this, evolving relationship when you are, not only when you get older and have perspective, but that idea that, tour is only this one static thing, and it doesn't, it's never going to change. Your experience will change with it, as far as maybe becoming more comfortable and traveling in buses as opposed to vans or whatever. But at the same time, the core of it doesn't change. It's hurry up and wait. All right, now we load it in. Right. Now we got 7 hours before we play or whatever.
Right, totally. And it's also sort of an alternate reality. I mean, I think that's why a lot of guys who are in, full-time touring bands kind of live this completely different life, and it's why I think they struggle a lot with what's going on back at home. I mean, it's certainly not an easy life for anyone who's married or who has kids. And, most people who are out on the road don't even know what day it is, because every day kind of bleeds together. Like there are no weekends. I mean, I guess weekends just mean some of the shows might be bigger.
Right.
But they're still doing the same thing every day, and it just doesn't really resemble real life. And luckily I haven't had enough of it to really let it reach that point to where it becomes more natural for me than regular life. It's always, for me, existed as a small part of my normal life. And so I feel like I've been able to kind of compartmentalize it in a healthier way. And honestly, I think that the only reason Demon Hunter is still playing, 18 years later is because we haven't done that. We haven't really grinded on the road. We haven't gotten sick of each other.
Leftovers or the DMV
Number 97.
or house cleaning or Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, I'm David Eagleman. I have a new podcast called Inner Cosmos on iHeart. I'm a neuroscientist and an author at Stanford University, and I've spent my career exploring the 3-pound universe in our heads. On my new podcast, I'm going to explore the relationship between our brains and our experiences by tackling unusual questions so we can better understand our lives and our realities. Like, does time really run in slow motion when you're in a car accident? Or can we create new senses for humans? Or what does dreaming have to do with the rotation of the planet? So join me weekly to uncover how your brain steers your behavior, your perception, and your reality. Listen to Inner Cosmos with David Eagleman on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Rosie O'Donnell, and I've got a new podcast called Onward with me, Rosie O'Donnell, on iHeart. I'm 60 years old now. Believe that? Yes, it's the truth. So I figure 2/3 of my life are done. 0 to 30, 30 to 60, and now I'm in the 60 to 90 if I'm lucky. Mostly, this part of my life is just about moving forward. And I thought, what a wonderful way to do it. With a podcast that I can sit down here in my home with people I love and admire, people I've worked with, people I've gotten to be friends with, and some family friends that feel like the real deal. Like who, you might ask? Natasha Lyonne, Jennifer Lewis, Ricky Lake, Fran Drescher, Sharon Gless, Kathy Griffin, Cameron Manheim. The list goes on and on. Listen to Onward with Rosie O'Donnell, a proud part of the Outspoken Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We haven't gotten sick of doing it, so I think it's actually really worked to our benefit when I look back, but I do love it in short runs and small doses. I do still really dig it. I love going out and meeting fans, and I love being able to play new material, and I still love the feeling of going out on stage. And so I feel like I'll always want that to be a part of my life, but I have no there's not a part of me that really wants for that to kind of start to overshadow the other things in my life.
Sure, yeah, to be the only thing, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
In a world where everyone is confined to their homes, society begins its largest binge watch to date. In the hallowed library of Hulu, or perhaps on a shelf of DVDs you haven't looked at in a decade, is a show that perfectly encapsulates life in the early aughts and launched a friendship that would inspire millions. Hi, I'm Zach Braff.
And I'm Donald Faison.
In 2001, we starred in Scrubs, a sitcom that revealed a glimpse of what it was like to survive a medical internship. As Turk and JD, we explored guy love.
Nearly 20 years later, a lot has changed. We're not Supermen, but we're still best friends. Given the mandatory lockdown, there's no better time to relive the series that brought us together in the first place. And we're doing it with a podcast.
That's right. people. We're going to bring friends and crew members and fellow cast members and writers. And guess what? We're going to even invite some of you to call into the podcast and ask all the questions you want of the entire Sacred Heart staff.
Join us for Fake Doctors, Real Friends on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts.
In full transparency, I've never been a fan of Demon Hunter. No shot against that art, but the thing that I was really, and I've always respected the work that you guys have done, and I think it's there's so many things that I identify with. And the thing that really brought it home to me, because I always, I would continually check out your records and be like, okay, maybe this one I like a little bit more. It's like, well, it's okay. But sure. The 45-day documentary that you did with our mutual friend Kale, I thought it was that to me is like almost essential viewing for people that play in bands and for people that, have that experience of creating art, because, it was such a affecting portrait of the way that your band and your art that you put out there is so deeply affecting to people, and in a very stripped away, non-egotistical manner. And I know this is weird where I give you a backhanded compliment. Well, I don't even get a backhanded compliment, but I'm just trying to back into the idea of just this, this really is an interesting portrait to the fact of how impactful art can be to people. And even me, as a non-fan of your band, can watch this and reflect it and be like, wow, that's a cool thing. I have to believe that in some fashion, that was kind of the feeling or message you were trying to get across with that DVD, or am I just reading too much into it?
Well, I mean, one thing became pretty apparent early on with the band, and that is that the band was resonating with people on a really deep emotional, spiritual, mental level, to a degree that we never really planned for or foresaw. And so when it became time to kind of do that tour, which we knew at the time it was going to be a big deal. We were kind of coming off the heels of a big release for us. It was a really great touring lineup. It was going to be the longest tour that we had done thus far. Production was at an all-time high, all those sorts of things. We started batting around the idea of doing a feature of sorts. And we knew we wanted it to have some sort of, live music component to it. But the thing that kind of ringed the most true for us, that we felt like would be more of our unique perspective and something that we could show that maybe not every other band could show, was just how deeply entrenched our fans were in the band and whatever sort of life that took in their own lives. And so what we wanted to do is essentially show, what touring life is like, but then interspersed with these stories of fans across the nation who have these kind of interesting or sometimes sad or sometimes enlightening stories that somehow kind of cross paths with the band or cross over into the band. And our fans have always been just a major life force of the band. And I know that pretty much every band could say that's had any success, obviously, but for us, it was just unlike anything that we ever imagined we would get. I've gotten correspondence, even in Focal Point and Training for Utopia, from plenty of people, but the sheer volume of correspondence that we've got since being in Demon Hunter, and the kinds of things that we would hear, and just the level of love that we would get from our fans was just something that we, like I said, we weren't ready for. But then once we realized what we had to kind of show that.
Got it. And so it became apparent over time as you were putting this footage together that, the crowd and fan support. one playing devil's advocate would be like, well, of course, like fans are going to like the band, but I'm speaking it from a fact that it's like, it just, I think it just does a really good job, summarizing and synopsizing, not only the specific experience that people have with the art that you create, but just kind of the, how people interact with art that decide to like pour all of themselves into it, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, to me, when I think about it and try to understand or explain like how deep that interaction or that level of resonance is with fans, when I think about some of the things that have been told to us or some of the things that have been done by our fans, quote unquote, because of us or whatever, I sometimes think that for a band our size, which we're not Metallica, I feel like we have a crazier level than some of our peers of what our fans are kind of doing in the name of their fanship for Demon Hunter. I feel like I'd be pretty hard pressed to find, a similar sized band that has lyrics on gravestones or has been married to songs or has proposed to songs or has, there's soldiers wearing our patches. There are, walls in Iraq with our logo spray painted on them. There are kids named Hunter because of our band. There's this crazy level of the type of things that our fans do because they love the band so much that I really honestly don't know if anyone shy of like a really large band would kind of see these types of things.
Totally. No, it's really, really cool. And I was thankful that you guys documented that and put that together because, I just think it's a really enlightening take on just, like I said, how people interact not only with your band, but just art in general.
Yeah.
And kind of on that same topic where, clearly you, with all of the design work you've done, from Asterisk, or Asterisk, I should say, up to the work that you do now, clearly there's this collision between art and commerce and, coming from the sort of DIY culture that we exist in, there's always been that, reticence to be like, okay, like once you make a living off your art, it changes. Like there's that whole fundamental argument that happens.
Of course, yeah.
So how have you kind of navigated that? Because clearly, you don't have a problem making money off of the art that you create with corporate clients and stuff like that. Like there's no misgivings as far as that's concerned. But I'm sure you had to have that kind of, evolving movement towards the idea of like, okay, this is what I'm comfortable with, but I have considered, these moving elements or whatever.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's.
I know it's not an easy question to like summarize per se, but yeah.
I mean, I've certainly thought about it before. It's not something that I think or talk about a lot. So, I think that there's obviously certain things that as an artist you feel comfortable doing or uncomfortable doing. And I've tried to hold on to those sorts of beliefs and ideals as I've gone. I can't necessarily say that I would do design work for anyone, obviously. There are plenty of companies that I would be pretty vehemently against doing work for. Just my own kind of, there's a bit of punk rock still left within the commerce of design for me. Granted, I do a lot of work for larger corporate clients, but for me, it's never really been. Punk rock was never that for me. Do you know what I mean? The No Effects punk rock is not necessarily like the exact same brand that I subscribe to. So it's never been about, the entirety of the corporate or commercial landscape. I don't throw that all out. It's more about, are there things that, on a smaller scale, are there things that, places where I would draw the line, like definitely. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, honestly, for me, it's just been a case by case thing. With the band, it's like, it is what it is. Like I said, it's not necessarily the type of thing where I could live off of, at this point in my life solely. So, I mean, between the design and the band, like I live comfortably, and that's great. But I'm not flush all the time. Like I don't not worry about, my bank account and paychecks and things like that. So I still feel like a working class guy. And I still feel like there's plenty of working class punk mentality kind of left to what I'm doing at this point. I certainly haven't arrived in that regard to the degree where I'm,
you're sitting on a pile of money. You're like, whatever,
exactly,
it's fine, dude. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I cashed the Target check. I don't need to worry about anything ever. Yeah.
Right. And to be clear, most of those big jobs are my brother, who, he's the one who's doing design full time. And so when you're doing commercial art, you're doing design as communication for other people. If you're not willing to do it for some of those larger companies, life's going to get pretty hard. And so unless you have big issues with certain companies or entities, there's really no reason why you would say no to any of those things.
Yeah, totally. And especially, too, where the notion that I think because our subculture has existed now for, 30 plus years, I'm speaking in broad terms, like the idea of, punk and hardcore.
Sure.
Now the fact that all of this underground influence, now people are of the age where they are influencing pop culture as a whole and being like bringing all of these things that would never, ever have appeared on people's radars, not only from, like skateboarding, tattooing, all this stuff that has progressed so far. And it's like, well, yeah, that's just because, people that are creative and are hustlers are the ones that are creating the stuff that you're looking at. And so, yeah, I think it's,
of course. Well, it's funny you say that because a lot of the jobs that we've gotten from a lot of these big clients over the years have been from some punk or hardcore kid that worked at that company. You know what I mean? That was either familiar with the band or with the company by virtue of the album packaging that we've done. And so there are basically old hardcore kids like all throughout these industries now, working at Nike and Lego and Target. And honestly, a lot of the people that we deal with at these companies are old hardcore kids. And so that, if it's any consolation.
Yeah, totally. It's like, dude, basically you're just you're given a larger sandbox to play in than, just our world of, zines and distros and stuff like that.
Of course. Yeah. And it's nice to keep one foot in that. And I still love doing album packaging, and I do it for quite a bit less than I work for corporate clients for, and I would have it no other way. But in order to make ends meet, it's nice to not be so closed off to some of the bigger projects.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing before I kind of let you go, because I could punish you probably for another hour, but I won't.
Oh, no worries.
Now that you're a father, do you have one or two children?
I have one.
You have one. Okay.
The little girl's 4.
Okay. And so, that profoundly changes people's lives, not only in the way that they look at themselves, but look at the world in general. And I always find it interesting, people that have come up in our subculture and then are now parents and then have this kind of reflexive idea of just like, okay, well, I was the person who pushed against a lot of these things that were presented to me, and how am I going to present, how am I going to present the world to my child? Not in like this strategic, cold manner, but
sure.
I'm sure that there has been reflective moments you've had as a father and, rearing a child that you've kind of reflected on. Are those things that you have kind of thought about, or is that just something you're kind of instinctually sort of like, I guess, hard baked in you that you're reacting that way?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are a lot of thoughts in that whole arena when you become a parent that that kind of swim around in your subconscious, at least. I certainly don't think that my daughter will be raised anything like I was raised. There will be a lot of things for her that were very different than how they were for me. We're trying our best to raise her on really good music. Like that's a big part of something for both my wife and I that I didn't have when I was a kid, in terms of seeing all the different types of music available and all sorts of cultures through that. And, I'm selfishly trying to push her into skateboarding and comic books and cool movies and things like that. And, I would love for her to grow up kind of being, decidedly comfortably outsider. And so it's kind of like time will only tell. The rule of thumb is that she's going to do something completely
different
opposite of what me or her mom is into, and so that's a little bit scary. Although if she gets into sports or whatever, if it's something that's stokes her out, like I'm all for it. And I by no means want her want to live through her in any way, but I again, selfishly, I would love to kind of provide a world for her that I've been entrenched in for a long time and have a lot of experience in. And, if she ends up being the kind of kid that likes going to shows, it's like, Dad can get you into a lot of shows probably for free.
Totally.
Or like, Comic-Con and like all that type of stuff that would be really fun to do. It's like, I've been so involved in that world so much, like I could be a well of knowledge in that regard. So that kind of thing does excite me. But as a parent, you gotta be careful how hard you push in that direction, because again, like there's going to be this natural inclination to do something different. And in some ways, I kind of hope there is. I hope that she's just into something wholeheartedly. But my biggest fear, I think, for her is a fear of a lack of want. When I was a kid, like I said, I grew up pretty poor. And I grew up in like a boring suburban neighborhood. And I think that had everything to do with this type of things that I got into and the type of things that really shaped me. And it really gave me a drive and a want to have more and to do different and to get out. And honestly, my biggest fear for her is that she won't want, certainly not financially, nearly as much as I did as a kid. And I think that's one of the things that, add to that social media and et cetera, that is, to me, plaguing the youth of today. But I think a lack of want is a real detriment, unfortunately. The pre-internet era, where you could kind of feel like you discovered something and really take ownership of it because of that fact, because you felt like you had to kind of do some work to find out about it or to get there, is gone. And so that is what my biggest concern is. It's just a lack of want. And it's the same concern I would have for any kid today, is that there's just everything is available, everything is accessible. And I think that's not good. Yeah. It's nice for us adults that kind of lived in that world and know how to do with or without it. It's really scary for people that don't know what to do without it. And so that's my fear.
Sure. Yeah, they're definitely, it's like everybody is searching for the proverbial record store guru, where it's like, and you can place that on every single medium that we have now. It's like, you need the tastemaker, you need the person that's like escorting you through this thing. And I think that's like, that's what people are leaning on of a younger generation, where it's just like, oh yeah, like I need to have this person like telling me the navigation points, because otherwise, you're left adrift with everything, and you don't know, like there's nothing you can like latch onto and be passionate about, because everything is there. Yeah.
You can be so flippant about the things that you are interested in, because it's the oversaturation of information and like all of those things is just everywhere. So you could be super into something for a while, but it didn't take you much effort to get there. So you can just kind of like leave it by the wayside at a certain point, like there was a pride in finding out about things and feeling like you kind of had one over on the rest of society because you found something that was niche and was interesting and was counterculture or whatever. And now that stuff is just right there on the surface for the picking for anyone. And so, it just doesn't garner the same sort of pride in yourself and the same sort of love and attachment to something that there once was.
That's true. Yeah, you can filter through things a lot quicker and easier in ways that it wasn't capable before. And I promise this last thing was kind of dovetailing into that, the fact that you personally have dove off social media. I don't know if this was like an intentional thing, or you're just like, oh yeah, I just don't care about it anymore. I'm going to guess that's a deliberate decision of yours to be like, yes, I need to be more connected with the people that are right in front of me as opposed to the screen. How have you felt? Like, clearly you felt good about it because you've stayed off of it. But tell me about that experience.
It's tempting at times, but it's just a huge time waster. Man, I could go.
You're like, I could go for another hour on this.
Oh, easily. For all the pros or positive things that, let's just call it the internet, has brought us, I think it is the most destructive thing that that we as a people have encountered in a long time. I think that what it's done and doing to people is, we're just at the very tip of the iceberg and seeing like how destructive that is. I think we can all remember a time when mental health wasn't such a hot topic. And I can't help but feel like most of that kind of the issue there is kind of pointing back to social media or something adjacent to it. People's lack of interaction, real life interaction, like what, on and on and on and on. I just think that it's, I would be a bit of a hypocrite the way that I feel in the way that I feel so strongly about it if I partook in it to much of a degree at all. So I've gone most of my life kind of being okay with living in that sort of hypocrisy because it felt like kind of a mild hypocrisy. And it was one that it was like it was self-appointed. So I was not really, there's no one else to really kind of imposing that on me. And so it definitely feels good to be off of it. And it feels good to kind of put my money where my mouth is in that regard. There are certain aspects, of course, that I miss about it. I found out about a lot of artists that way. I've even hired artists through Instagram and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's, even for how ill I feel about it for the culture at large, it's also just a massive time suck for me. And I'm just a person that doesn't really, I don't really do well with things that aren't productive. And I have enough kind of going on in my head and on my personal little to-do lists and things to keep me busy 24 hours a day. So I don't need any sort of thing infiltrating that and just wasting my time.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it's funny because I think the people that put the most critical eye towards, social media, whatever, parenting, like all the things we were just discussing, I think because of the nature of this, the subculture that we were raised in, to whatever, question everything and to look at things in a different light. I think that because we ask these questions and because we go through these thought exercises in ways that, frankly, a lot of people who, don't have the same experience as us don't think about it in those terms.
No, yeah, that's true.
And I think it is the fact that, and I'm sure you've encountered this too, where it's like there are many people within the context of our peers who are just like, yeah, like I'm not going to have kids because this world is so horrible. And you're like, I get it. I understand. Like I understand. I
totally do.
Yeah. Like, I have a 7-year-old child, and like I can't look anybody in the eye and be like, no, I understand why you wouldn't want to have a child. But then in my head, I'm like, damn it, because this person who is expressing that to me, who has like, an amazing partner in life and would probably be unbelievable parents.
Yeah.
And they have, a conscientious objector not going to have a child. I'm like, man, I wish I could take some of those kids from those other people who haven't even thought about this to put it with those people.
Yeah, I know. No kidding.
But yeah, but like I said, I think ultimately because you're putting these thoughts, and whether it's people actually taking the step that you did where they're removing themselves from social media, but you need to have that personal audit to the level of comfort that you have with these things. Otherwise, yeah, you just march along and don't ever question anything.
For sure. And, my kind of solve personally for the little bit of interaction that I do have, the band has a fan club of sorts called the Blessed Resistance, which is kind of an online community. And so I'm on there kind of commenting, and I post a ton of stuff, and I'm interacting with people. And so that's a little dose, to me, like a little healthy dose of that.
Right. A little dopamine rush, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that's cool. Well, dude, I really appreciate you hanging out, Ryan. This has been super fun, and I hope you've enjoyed it in some capacity.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Oh, hey there. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks, Ryan, for coming on the show. And I also want to thank Ryan Downey, his manager, the manager of his band, for hooking up this conversation. Thank you, Ryan. I don't know if you're actually listening to this, but thank you nonetheless. I hope you feel the positive vibes that are garnished from me thanking you. What do we got next week? Well, first of all, let's talk about how much fun that conversation was where I talked to Ryan Clark about his, Xing up at school. I love that. I reflect on my time as a burgeoning straight edge kid in high school and just Xing up at every day. It's like, what was I doing? Well, I was really proud of it. That's what I was. And I still am, for that matter, because I still call myself straight edge and I'm 38 years old. Anyways, obviously you can tell I've had a lot of coffee right now. What do I got next week? I have Chris Popadak, which I've never said his last name out loud, so I'm probably butchering it, but most people call him Poppy or Chris. But Chris plays the drums in the band called Hawthorne Heights, and he also plays in The Story Changes. And he is a really interesting dude. I mean, hardcore kid through and through, and plays in Hawthorne Heights, which I know most people wouldn't really kind of connect to hardcore in Hawthorne Heights, but they're a real deal. I wouldn't say hardcore band, but they're a real deal band. They've been doing it for a long time, and Chris has a lot of interesting insights that we were able to kind of dive into, and then becoming straight edge as an adult, like so much interesting stuff. So that's what we got next week. It's always fun on the show, right? I throw curveballs at you all the time, and I've got some great curveballs coming up for you like I always do. Thanks to our good buddies at SiriusXM. They offer amazing commercial-free music plus sports, talk, comedy, and news. They have it all. And then you can get your first 3 months of SiriusXM outside the car for just $1. Go to SiriusXM.com/words to see offer details and to subscribe. That's Sirius, SiriusXM.com/words. The offer is only available to new SiriusXM streaming subscribers. SiriusXM, no car required. But now, really, goodbye.
You've been listening to the Jabberjaw Podcast Network, jabberjawmedia.com. Shh.
Hi there, I'm Zach Braff.
And I'm Donald Faison.
We're real-life best friends. but we met playing fake life best friends Turk and JD on the sitcom Scrubs.
20 years later, we've decided to rewatch the series one episode at a time and put our memories into a podcast you can listen to at home.
We're going to get all our special guest friends like Sarah Chalk, John C. McGinley, Neil Flynn, Judy Reyes.
Show creator Bill Lawrence, editors, writers, and even prop masters will tell us about what inspired the series and how we became a family.
You can listen to the podcast Fake Doctors, Real Friends with Zach and Donald on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Leftovers. Or the DMV.
Number 97.
Or house cleaning. Or
Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, I'm David Eagleman. I have a new podcast called Inner Cosmos on iHeart. I'm going to explore the relationship between our brains and our experiences by tackling unusual questions like, can we create new senses for humans? So join me weekly to uncover how your brain steers your behavior, your perception, and your reality. Listen to Inner Cosmos with David Eagleman on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Miami, early 1980s, just as the drug scene was shifting from cannabis to cocaine, an era of crime, corruption, and the cartels, motivating violent murders and controversial alliances.
My God, talk about walking into the devil's den.
Binge the full season of Murder in Miami now on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get the stories that matter to you.